364, chapters 47, 48, and 49. Book talk begins at... Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 364, Tomato Style. Well, hello. Yes, this week, Tomato Style. And I know you're probably thinking to yourself, Self? What does she mean? And it's Pomodoro, which is Italian for tomato. But if you are unfamiliar with the Pomodoro style of time management, and I know I'm probably late to the party on this, this has been out for a while, it's a very smart way to organize your time, especially if you are a little bit on the ADD side, a little bit on the shiny side of things. You may find that this is really useful to you. I will tell you that I have had to do a modified version of it because I'm special that way. And normally you use a timer. You give yourself 25 minutes to do something. You then get 5 minutes to do something else completely different. Walk away, just walk away. And then come back and give yourself another 25 minutes. And you're supposed to keep doing these 25-minute stints until the thing that you have to do is done. Well, my work never ends. There is never an end point where I can look at something and say, that's complete. Now I can go do something else. So instead, I've modified it a little bit, and I do 25 minutes on one thing and a break, 25 minutes on another thing and a break, 25 minutes on another thing and a break. And by the end of the day, I have probably managed to get 2 things out of the 18 that I had to do done. So I can prioritize the list differently and manage my time more efficiently. And as a consequence, I am a much happier Heather. So Pomodoro, loving it, very helpful. Thought I'd pass it along. Now, as with many books we have read together on CraftLit, once we get towards the end of the book, the need for providing you with oddities of language and strange things that won't make any sense contextually because we've left that history behind us, that kind of stuff just disappears, and it becomes really just the wrapping up of the story. And in many ways, that is what happens here today. However, there is one thing I would ask you to listen to, and that is listen to the way that Gaskell writes Henry Lennox in the next 3 chapters. We'll talk about it afterwards, but just keep your ear open for it. I think it's interesting. Oh, and on the Henry Lennox thing, aside from him being written very interestingly this week, I think, he also says some interesting things that are a little obscure for our ears today, or at least were a little obscure for my ears today. And this is what he says. The first thing he said was, talking about Margaret, she has been very farouche with me for a long time, and it's spelled Farouche. I had not come across this word before, and it just means shy or sullen, or kind of withdrawn. So she's been very farouche with me for a long time and is only beginning to thaw a little from her Zenobia ways. Zenobia spelled Zenobia. She is the first female ruler he mentions. Then he goes on to say, she has the making of a Cleopatra in her, if only she were a little more pagan. So Zenobia and Cleopatra are contrasts. Zenobia was the queen of Palmyra. She governed her country and fought unsuccessfully against the Romans, and this was in the 3rd century of the Common Era. Cleopatra, queen of Egypt, contrast. She was an example of the seductive kind of ruler who distracted Julius Caesar and Mark Antony and kind of kept them away from what they should have been doing, ruling Egypt by Roman law instead of letting the Egyptian ruler get away with what she wanted to get away with, which, of course, didn't last all that long. But there it is. And in these chapters, Edith is either going to crack you up or make you want to shove her face in a pie plate. I'm not sure which one, but for me, she cracked me up this time around, so I hope she makes you laugh too. Cromer. You need to know where Cromer is. Cromer is a seaside town in Norfolk. That's on the east coast of England. And with that, I think we should listen to 47, 48, and 49 of Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South.
Chapter 47. Something Wanting. Experience, like a pale musician, holds a dulcimer of patience in his hand. Whence harmonies we cannot understand, of God's will in his worlds the strain unfolds, in sad, perplexing minors. Mrs. Browning. About this time Dixon returned from Milton and assumed her post as Margaret's maid. She brought endless pieces of Milton gossip. How Martha had gone to live with Miss Thornton on the latter's marriage, with an account of the bridesmaids, dresses, and breakfasts at that interesting ceremony. How people thought that Mr. Thornton had made too grand a wedding of it, considering he had lost a deal by the strike, and had had to pay so much for the failure of his contracts. How little money articles of furniture, long cherished by Dixon, had fetched at the sale, which was a shame considering how rich folks were at Milton. How Mrs. Thornton had come one day and got 2 or 3 good bargains, and Mr. Thornton had come the next, and in his desire to obtain 1 or 2 things had bid against himself, much to the enjoyment of the bystanders, so, as Dixon observed, that made things even. If Mrs. Thornton paid too little, Mr. Thornton paid too much. Mr. Bell had sent all sorts of orders about the books. There was no understanding him, he was so particular. If he had come himself, it would have been all right, but letters always were and always will be more puzzling than they are worth. Dixon had not much to tell about the Higginses. Her memory had an aristocratic bias, and was very treacherous whenever she tried to recall any circumstance connected with those below her in life. Nicholas was very well, she believed. He had been several times at the house asking for news of Miss Margaret, the only person who ever did ask, except once Mr. Thornton. And Mary? Oh, of course she was very well, a great, stout, slatternly thing. She did hear, or perhaps it was only a dream of hers, though it would be strange if she had dreamt of such people as the Higginses, that Mary had gone to work at Mr. Thornton's mill because her father wished her to know how to cook. But what nonsense that could mean she didn't know. Margaret rather agreed with her that the story was incoherent enough to be like a dream. Still, it was pleasant to have someone now with whom she could talk of Milton and Milton people. Dixon was not over-fond of the subject, rather wishing to leave that part of her life in shadow. She liked much more to dwell upon speeches of Mr. Bell's, which had suggested an idea to her of what was really his intention, making Margaret his heiress. But her young lady gave her no encouragement, nor in any way gratified her insinuating enquiries, however disguised in the form of suspicions or assertions. All this time, Margaret had a strange, undefined longing to hear that Mr. Bell had gone to pay one of his business visits to Milton. For it had been well understood between them, at the time of their conversation at Helston, that the explanation she had desired should only be given to Mr. Thornton by word of mouth, and even in that manner should be in no wise forced upon him. Mr. Bell was no great correspondent, but he wrote from time to time long or short letters as the humour took him, and although Margaret was not conscious of any definite hope on receiving them, yet she always put away his notes with a little feeling of disappointment. He was not going to Milton. He said nothing about it, at any rate. Well, she must be patient. Sooner or later the mists would be cleared away. Mr. Bell's letters were hardly like his usual self. They were short and complaining, with every now and then a little touch of bitterness that was unusual. He did not look forward to the future. He rather seemed to regret the past and be weary of the present. Margaret fancied that he could not be well. but in answer to some enquiry of hers as to his health, he sent her a short note saying there was an old-fashioned complaint called the spleen, that he was suffering from that, and it was for her to decide if it was more mental or physical, but that he should like to indulge himself in grumbling without being obliged to send a bulletin every time. In consequence of this note, Margaret made no more enquiries about his health. One day Edith let out accidentally a fragment of a conversation which she had had with Mr. Bell when he was last in London, which possessed Margaret with the idea that he had some notion of taking her to pay a visit to her brother and new sister-in-law at Cadiz in the autumn. She questioned and cross-questioned Edith till the latter was weary and declared that there was nothing more to remember. All he had said was that he half thought he should go and hear for himself what Frederick had to say about the mutiny, and that it would be a good opportunity for Margaret to become acquainted with her new sister-in-law. That he always went somewhere during the long vacation, and did not see why he should not go to Spain as well as anywhere else. That was all. Edith hoped Margaret did not want to leave them, that she was so anxious about all this. And then, having nothing else particular to do, she cried and said that she knew she cared much more for Margaret than Margaret did for her. Margaret comforted her as well as she could, but she could hardly explain to her how this idea of Spain, mere Chateau en Espagne as it might be, charmed and delighted her. Edith was in the mood to think that any pleasure enjoyed away from her was a tacit affront, or, at best, a proof of indifference. So Margaret had to keep her pleasure to herself, and could only let it escape by the safety valve of asking Dixon, when she dressed for dinner, if she would not like to see Master Frederick and his new wife very much indeed.
"She's a papist, miss, ain't she?"
"I believe— oh, yes, certainly," said Margaret, a little damped for an instant at this recollection.
"And they live in a popish country?"
"Yes."
"Then I'm afraid I must say that my soul is dearer to me than even Master Frederick, his own dear self. I should be in a perpetual terror, miss, lest I should be converted."
"Oh," said Margaret, "I do not know that I am going, and if I go, I am not such a fine lady as to be unable to travel without you. No, dear old Dixon, you shall have a long holiday if we go. But I am afraid it is a long if." Now Dixon did not like this speech. In the first place, she did not like Margaret's trick of calling her dear old Dixon whenever she was particularly demonstrative. She knew that Miss Hale was apt to call all people that she liked old as a sort of term of endearment. But Dixon always winced away from the application of the word to herself, who, being not much past 50, was, she thought, in the very prime of life. Secondly, she did not like being so easily taken at her word. She had, with all her terror, a lurking curiosity about Spain, the Inquisition, and popish mysteries. So, after clearing her throat, as if to show her willingness to do away with difficulties, she asked Miss Hale whether she thought, if she took care never to see a priest or enter into one of their churches, there would be so very much danger of her being converted. Master Frederick, to be sure, had gone over unaccountable. "I fancy it was love that first predisposed him to conversion," said Margaret, sighing.
"Indeed, miss," said Dixon. "Well, I can preserve myself from priests and from churches, but love steals in unawares. I think it's as well I should not go."
Margaret was afraid of letting her mind run too much upon this Spanish plan. But it took off her thoughts from too impatiently dwelling upon her desire to have all explained to Mr. Thornton. Mr. Bell appeared for the present to be stationary at Oxford, and to have no immediate purpose of going to Milton, and some secret restraint seemed to hang over Margaret, and prevent her from even asking or alluding again to any probability of such a visit on his part. Nor did she feel at liberty to name what Edith had told her of the idea he had entertained, it might be but for 5 minutes, of going to Spain. He had never named it at Helston during all that sunny day of leisure. It was very probably but the fancy of a moment, but If it were true, what a bright outlet it would be from the monotony of her present life, which was beginning to fall upon her. One of the great pleasures of Margaret's life at this time was in Edith's boy. He was the pride and plaything of both father and mother, as long as he was good, but he had a strong will of his own, and as soon as he burst out into one of his stormy passions, Edith would throw herself back in despair and fatigue and sigh out, "Oh, dear, what shall I do with him? Do, Margaret, please ring the bell for Hanley." But Margaret almost liked him better in these manifestations of character than in his good blue-sashed moods. She would carry him off into a room where they two alone battled it out, she with a firm power which subdued him into peace, while every sudden charm and wile she possessed was exerted on the side of right, until he would rub his little hot and tear-smeared face all over hers, kissing and caressing till he often fell asleep in her arms or on her shoulder. Those were Margaret's sweetest moments. They gave her a taste of the feeling that she believed would be denied to her forever. Mr. Henry Lennox added a new and not disagreeable element to the course of the household life by his frequent presence. Margaret thought him colder, if more brilliant than formerly, but there were strong intellectual tastes and much and varied knowledge which gave flavour to the otherwise rather insipid conversation. Margaret saw glimpses in him of a slight contempt for his brother and sister-in-law and for their mode of life, which he seemed to consider as frivolous and purposeless. He once or twice spoke to his brother in Margaret's presence in a pretty sharp tone of enquiry as to whether he meant entirely to relinquish his profession, and on Captain Lennox's reply that he had quite enough to live upon, she had seen Mr. Lennox's curl of the lip as he said, "And is that all you live for?" But the brothers were much attached to each other, in the way that any two persons are, when the one is cleverer and always leads the other, and this last is patiently content to be led. Mr. Lennox was pushing on in his profession, cultivating with profound calculation all those connections that might eventually be of service to him, keen-sighted, far-seeing, intelligent, sarcastic, and proud. Since the one long conversation relating to Frederick's affairs, which she had with him the first evening in Mr. Bell's presence, she had had no great intercourse with him, farther than that which arose out of their close relation with the same household. But this was enough to wear off the shyness on her side, and any symptoms of mortified pride and vanity on his. They met continually, of course, but she thought that he rather avoided being alone with her. She fancied that he, as well as she, perceived that they had drifted strangely apart from their former anchorage side by side in many of their opinions and all their tastes. And yet, when he had spoken unusually well, or with remarkable epigrammatic point, she felt that his eyes sought the expression of her countenance first of all, if but for an instant, and that, in the family intercourse which constantly threw them together, her opinion was the one to which he listened with a deference, the more complete, because it was reluctantly paid and concealed as much as possible. Chapter 48. Never to be found again. My own, my father's friend, I cannot part with thee. I never have shown, thou never hast known, how dear thou art to me. Anonymous. The elements of the dinner parties which Mrs. Lennox gave were these. Her friends contributed the beauty, Captain Lennox the easy knowledge of the subjects of the day, and Mr. Henry Lennox and the sprinkling of rising men who were received as his friends brought the wit, the cleverness, the keen and extensive knowledge of which they knew well enough how to avail themselves without seeming pedantic or burdening the rapid flow of conversation. These dinners were delightful, but even here Margaret's dissatisfaction found her out. Every talent, every feeling, every acquirement, nay, even every tendency towards virtue was used up as materials for fireworks. The hidden sacred fire exhausted itself in sparkle and crackle. They talked about art in a merely sensuous way, dwelling on outside effects instead of allowing themselves to learn what it has to teach. They lashed themselves up into an enthusiasm about high subjects in company and never thought about them when they were alone. They squandered their capabilities of appreciation into a mere flow of appropriate words. One day, after the gentleman had come up into the drawing-room, Mr. Lennox drew near to Margaret and addressed her in almost the first voluntary words he had spoken to her since she had returned to live in Harley Street. "You did not look pleased at what Shirley was saying at dinner."
"Didn't I? My face must be very expressive," replied Margaret.
"It always was. It has not lost the trick of being eloquent."
"I did not like," said Margaret hastily, "his way of advocating what he knew to be wrong, so glaringly wrong, even in jest."
"But it was very clever. How every word told. Do you remember the happy epithets?"
"Yes."
"And despise them, you would like to add. Pray don't scruple, though he is my friend."
"There, that is the exact tone in you that—" She stopped short. He listened for a moment to see if she would finish her sentence, but she only reddened and turned away. Before she did so, however, she heard him say in a very low, clear voice, "If my tones or modes of thought are what you dislike, will you do me the justice to tell me so, and so give me the chance of learning to please you?" All these weeks there was no intelligence of Mr. Bell's going to Milton. He had spoken of it at Helston as of a journey which he might have to take in a very short time from then. But he must have transacted his business by writing, Margaret thought, ere now, and she knew that, if he could, he would avoid going to a place which he disliked, and, moreover, would little understand the secret importance which she affixed to the explanation that could only be given by word of mouth. She knew that he would feel that it was necessary, that it should be done, but whether in summer, autumn, or winter, it would signify very little. It was now August, and there had been no mention of the Spanish journey to which he had alluded to Edith, and Margaret tried to reconcile herself to the fading away of this illusion. But one morning she received a letter saying that next week he meant to come up to town. He wanted to see her about a plan which he had in his head, and, moreover, he intended to treat himself to a little doctoring, as he had begun to come round to her opinion that it would be pleasanter to think that his health was more in fault than he when he found himself irritable and cross. There was altogether a tone of forced cheerfulness in the letter, as Margaret noticed afterwards, but at the time her attention was taken up by Edith's exclamations. "Coming up to town? Oh, dear, and I am so worn out by the heat that I don't believe I have the strength enough in me for another dinner. Besides, everybody has left but our dear stupid selves who can't settle where to go. There would be nobody to meet him. I'm sure he would much rather come and dine with us quite alone than with the most agreeable strangers you could pick up. Besides, if he is not well, he won't wish for invitations. I am glad he has owned it at last. I was sure he was ill from the whole tone of his letters, and yet he would not answer me when I asked him, and I had no third person to whom I could apply for news. Oh, he is not very ill, or he would not think of Spain." "He never mentioned Spain." "No, but his plan that is to be proposed evidently relates to that. But would you really go in such weather as this?" "Oh, it will get cooler every day." "Yes, think of it. I am only afraid I have thought and wished too much, in that absorbing, wilful way which is sure to be disappointed, or else gratified to the letter, while in the spirit it gives no pleasure." "But that's superstitious, I'm sure, Margaret." "No, I don't think it is, only it ought to warn me and check me from giving way to such passionate wishes. It is a sort of give me children or else I die. I'm afraid my cry is, let me go to Cadiz or else I die. My dear Margaret, you'll be persuaded to stay there, and then what shall I do? Oh, I wish I could find somebody for you to marry here, that I could be sure of you. I shall never marry. Nonsense and double nonsense. Why, as Sholto says, you're such an attraction to the house that he knows ever so many men who will be glad to visit here next year for your sake.
Margaret drew herself up haughtily.
Do you know, Edith, I sometimes think your Corfu life has taught you, well, just a shade or two of coarseness.
Edith began to sob so bitterly and to declare so vehemently that Margaret had lost all love for her and no longer looked upon her as a friend that Margaret came to think that she had expressed too harsh an opinion for the relief of her own wounded pride, and ended by being Edith's slave for the rest of the day, while that little lady, overcome by wounded feeling, lay like a victim on the sofa, heaving occasionally a profound sigh, till at last she fell asleep. Mr. Bell did not make his appearance even on the day to which he had for a second time deferred his visit. The next morning there came a letter from Wallace, his servant, stating that his master had not been feeling well for some time, which had been the true reason of his putting off his journey, and that at the very time when he should have set out for London, he had been seized with an apoplectic fit. It was, indeed, Wallace added, the opinion of the medical men that he could not survive the night, and, more than probable, that by the time Miss Hale received this letter, his poor master would be no more. Margaret received this letter at breakfast time and turned very pale as she read it. Then, silently putting it into Edith's hands, she left the room. Edith was terribly shocked as she read it, and cried in a sobbing, frightened, childish way, much to her husband's distress. Mrs. Shaw was breakfasting in her own room, and upon him devolved the task of reconciling his wife to the near contact into which she seemed to be brought with death, for the first time that she could remember in her life. Here was a man who was to have dined with them today, lying dead, or dying instead. It was some time before she could think of Margaret. Then she started up and followed her upstairs into her room. Dixon was packing up a few toilet articles, and Margaret was hastily putting on her bonnet, shedding tears all the time, and her hands trembling so that she could hardly tie the strings.
Oh, dear Margaret, how shocking! What are you doing? Are you going out? Sholto would telegraph or do anything you like. I am going to Oxford. There is a train in half an hour. Dixon has offered to go with me, but I could have gone by myself. I must see him again. Besides, he may be better and want some care. He has been like a father to me. Don't stop me, Edith. But I must. Mamma won't like it at all. Come and ask her about it, Margaret. You don't know where you're going. I should not mind if he had a house of his own, but in his fellows' rooms. Come to Mamma, and do ask her before you go. It will not take a minute.
Margaret yielded and lost her train. In the suddenness of the event, Mrs. Shaw became bewildered and hysterical, and so the precious time slipped by. But there was another train in a couple of hours, and after various discussions on propriety and impropriety, it was decided that Captain Lennox should accompany Margaret, as the one thing to which she was constant was her resolution to go, alone or otherwise, by the next train, whatever might be said of the propriety or impropriety of the next step. Her father's friend, her own friend, was lying at the point of death, and the thought of this came upon her with such vividness that she was surprised herself at the firmness with which she asserted something of her right to independence of action. And 5 minutes before the time for starting, she found herself sitting in a railway carriage opposite to Captain Lennox. It was always a comfort to her to think that she had gone, though it was only to hear that he had died in the night. She saw the rooms that he had occupied and associated them ever after most fondly in her memory with the idea of her father and his one cherished and faithful friend. They had promised Edith before starting that if all had ended as they feared, they would return to dinner, so that long, lingering look round the room in which her father had died had to be interrupted, and a quiet farewell taken of the kind old face that had so often come out with pleasant words and merry quips and cranks. Captain Lennox fell asleep on their journey home, and Margaret could cry at leisure and bethink her of this fatal year and all the woes it had brought to her. No sooner was she fully aware of one loss than another came, not to supersede her grief for the one before, but to reopen wounds and feelings scarcely healed. But at the sound of the tender voices of her aunt and Edith, of merry little Sholto's glee at her arrival, and at the sight of the well-lighted rooms with their mistress pretty in her paleness and her eager, sorrowful interest, Margaret roused herself from her heavy trance of almost superstitious hopelessness, and began to feel that even around her joy and gladness might gather. She had Edith's place on the sofa. Sholto was taught to carry Aunt Margaret's cup of tea very carefully to her, and by the time she went up to dress, she could thank God for having spared her dear old friend a long or a painful illness. But when night came, solemn night, and all the house was quiet, Margaret still sat watching the beauty of a London sky at such an hour, on such a summer evening. The faint pink reflection of earthly lights on the soft clouds that float tranquilly into the white moonlight out of the warm gloom which lies motionless around the horizon. Margaret's room had been the day nursery of her childhood, just when it merged into girlhood, and when the feelings and conscience had been first awakened into full activity. On some such night as this, she remembered promising to herself to live as brave and noble a life as any heroine she ever read or heard of in romance, a life sans peur et sans reproche. It had seemed to her then that she had only to will, and such a life would be accomplished. And now she had learnt that not only to will, but also to pray, was a necessary condition in the truly heroic. Trusting to herself, she had fallen. It was a just consequence of her sin that all excuses for it, all temptation to it, should remain forever unknown to the person in whose opinion it had sunk her lowest. She stood face to face at last with her sin. She knew it for what it was. Mr. Bell's kindly sophistry that nearly all men were guilty of equivocal actions, and that the motive ennobled the evil, had never had much real weight with her. Her own first thought of how, if she had known all, she might have fearlessly told the truth seemed low and poor. Nay, even now, her anxiety to have her character for truth partially excused in Mr. Thornton's eyes, as Mr. Bell had promised to do, was a very small and petty consideration, now that she was afresh taught by death what life should be. If all the world spoke, acted, or kept silence with intent to deceive, if dearest interests were at stake and dearest lives in peril, if no one should ever know of her truth or her falsehood to measure out their honor or their contempt for her by, straight alone where she stood, in the presence of God, she prayed that she might have strength to speak and act the truth for evermore. Chapter 49. Breathing Tranquility. And down the sunny beach she paces slowly, with many doubtful pauses by the way. Grief hath an influence, so hushed and holy. Hood.
Is not Margaret the heiress?
Whispered Edith to her husband, as they were in their room alone at night after the sad journey to Oxford. She had pulled his tall head down and stood upon tiptoe and implored him not to be shocked before she had ventured to ask this question. Captain Lennox was, however, quite in the dark. If he had ever heard, he had forgotten. It could not be much that a fellow of a small college had to leave, but he had never wanted her to pay for her board, and £250 a year was something ridiculous, considering that she did not take wine. Edith came down upon her feet a little bit sadder, with the romance blown to pieces. A week afterwards she came prancing towards her husband and made him a low curtsy.
I am right and you are wrong, most noble captain. Margaret has had a lawyer's letter, and she is residuary legatee, the legacies being about £2,000 and the remainder about £40,000 at the present value of property in Milton.
Indeed? And how does she take her good fortune?
Oh, it seems she knew she was to have it all along, only she had no idea it was so much. She looks very white and pale and says she's afraid of it, but that's nonsense, you know, and will soon go off. I left Mamma pouring congratulations down her throat and stole away to tell you.
It seemed to be supposed by general consent that the most natural thing was to consider Mr. Lennox henceforward as Margaret's legal adviser. She was so entirely ignorant of all forms of business that in nearly everything she had to refer to him. He chose out her attorney. He came to her with papers to be signed. He was never so happy as when teaching her of what all these mysteries of the law were the signs and types.
"Henry," said Edith one day archly, "do you know what I hope and expect all these long conversations with Margaret will end in?"
"No, I don't," said he, reddening, "and I desire you not to tell me."
"Oh, very well, then. I need not tell Sholto not to ask Mr. Montague so often to the house."
"Just as you choose," said he with forced coolness. "What you are thinking of may or may not happen, but this time, before I commit myself, I will see my ground clear. Ask whom you choose. It may not be very civil, Edith, but if you meddle in it, you will mar it. She has been very farouche with me for a long time, and is only just beginning to thaw a little from her Zenobia ways. She has the making of a Cleopatra in her, if only she were a little more pagan."
"For my part," said Edith a little maliciously, "I am very glad she is a Christian. I know so very few."
There was no Spain for Margaret that autumn, although to the last she hoped that some fortunate occasion would call Frederick to Paris, whither she could easily have met with a convoy. Instead of Cadiz, she had to content herself with Cromer. To that place her Aunt Shaw and the Lennoxes were bound. They had all along wished her to accompany them, and consequently, with their characters, they made but lazy efforts to forward her own separate wish. Perhaps Cromer was, in one sense of the expression, the best for her. She needed bodily strengthening and bracing as well as rest. Among other hopes that had vanished was the hope, the trust that she had had, that Mr. Bell would have given Mr. Thornton the simple facts of the family circumstances which had preceded the unfortunate accident that led to Leonard's death. Whatever opinion, however changed it might be from what Mr. Thornton had once entertained, she had wished it to be based upon a true understanding of what she had done and why she had done it. It would have been a pleasure to her, would have given her rest on a point on which she should now all her life be restless, unless she could resolve not to think upon it. It was now so long after the time of these occurrences that there was no possible way of explaining them save the one she had lost by Mr. Bell's death. She must just submit, like many another, to be misunderstood. But though reasoning herself into the belief that in this hers was no uncommon lot, her heart did not ache the less with longing that some time, years and years hence, before he died at any rate, he might know how much she had been tempted. She thought that she did not want to hear that all was explained to him. If only she could be sure that he would know. But this wish was vain like so many others, and when she had schooled herself into this conviction, she turned with all her heart and strength to the life that lay immediately before her, and resolved to strive and make the best of that. She used to sit long hours upon the beach, gazing intently on the waves as they chafed with perpetual motion against the pebbly shore. Or she looked out upon the more distant heave and sparkle against the sky, and heard, without being conscious of hearing, the eternal psalm which went up continually. She was soothed without knowing how or why. Listlessly she sat there on the ground, her hands clasped round her knees, while her Aunt Shaw did small shoppings, and Edith and Captain Lennox rode far and wide on shore and inland. The nurses, sauntering on with their charges, would pass and repass her, and wonder in whispers what she could find to look at so long, day after day. And when the family gathered at dinner-time, Margaret was so silent and absorbed that Edith voted her moped, and hailed a proposal of her husband's with great satisfaction that Mr. Henry Lennox should be asked to take Cromer for a week on his return from Scotland in October. But all this time for thought enabled Margaret to put events in their right places as to origin and significance, both as regarded her past life and her future. Those hours by the seaside were not lost, as anyone might have seen who had had the perception to read or the care to understand the look that Margaret's face was gradually acquiring. Mr. Henry Lennox was excessively struck by the change. "The sea has done Miss Hale an immense deal of good, I should fancy," said he, when she first left the room after his arrival in their family circle. "She looks 10 years younger than she did in Harley Street."
"That's the bonnet I got her," said Edith triumphantly. "I knew it would suit her the moment I saw it."
"I beg your pardon," said Mr. Lennox in the half-contemptuous, half-indulgent tone he generally used to Edith. "But I believe I know the difference between the charms of a dress and the charms of a woman. No mere bonnet would have made Miss Hale's eyes so lustrous, and yet so soft, or her lips so ripe and red, and her face altogether so full of peace and light. She is like, and yet more," he dropped his voice, "like the Margaret Hale of Helston." From this time the clever and ambitious man bent all his powers to gaining Margaret. He loved her sweet beauty. He saw the latent sweep of her mind, which could easily, he thought, be led to embrace all the objects on which he had set his heart. He looked upon her fortune only as a part of the complete and superb character of herself and her position. Yet he was fully aware of the rise which it would immediately enable him, the poor barrister, to take. Eventually he would earn such success and such honours as would enable him to pay her back with interest that first advance in wealth which he should owe to her. He had been to Milton on business connected with her property on his return from Scotland, and with the quick eye of a skilled lawyer, ready ever to take in and weigh contingencies, he had seen that much additional value was yearly accruing to the lands and tenements which she owned in that prosperous and increasing town. He was glad to find that the present relationship between Margaret and himself, of client and legal adviser, was gradually superseding the recollection of that unlucky, mismanaged day at Helston. He had thus unusual opportunities of intimate intercourse with her, besides those that arose from the connection between the families. Margaret was only too willing to listen as long as he talked of Milton, though he had seen none of the people whom she more especially knew. It had been the tone with her aunt and cousin to speak of Milton with dislike and contempt, just such feelings as Margaret was ashamed to remember she had expressed and felt on first going to live there. But Mr. Lennox almost exceeded Margaret in his appreciation of the character of Milton and its inhabitants. Their energy, Their power, their indomitable courage in struggling and fighting, their lurid vividness of existence captivated and arrested his attention. He was never tired of talking about them, and had never perceived how selfish and material were too many of the ends they proposed to themselves as the result of all their mighty, untiring endeavour, till Margaret, even in the midst of her gratification, had the candour to point this out as the tainting sin in so much that was noble and to be admired. Still, when other subjects palled upon her, and she gave but short answers to many questions, Henry Lennox found out that an enquiry as to some darkshire peculiarity of character called back the light into her eye, the glow into her cheek. When they returned to town, Margaret fulfilled one of her seaside resolves and took her life into her own hands. Before they went to Cromer, she had been as docile to her aunt's laws as if she were still the scared little stranger who cried herself to sleep that first night in the Harley Street nursery. But she had learnt, in those solemn hours of thought, that she herself must one day answer for her own life and what she had done with it, and she tried to settle that most difficult problem for women: how much was to be utterly merged in obedience to authority, and how much might be set apart for freedom in working. Mrs. Shaw was as good-tempered as could be, and Edith had inherited this charming domestic quality. Margaret herself had probably the worst temper of the three, for her quick perceptions and over-lively imagination made her hasty, and her early isolation from sympathy had made her proud. But she had an indescribable childlike sweetness of heart, which made her manners, even in her rarely wilful moods, irresistible of old, and now, chastened even by what the world called her good fortune, she charmed her reluctant aunt into acquiescence with her will. So Margaret gained the acknowledgment of her right to follow her own ideas of duty.
"Only don't be strong-minded," pleaded Edith. "Mamma wants you to have a footman of your own, and I'm sure you're very welcome, for they're great plagues. Only, to please me, darling, don't go and have a strong mind. It's the only thing I ask. Footman or no footman, don't be strong-minded." "Don't be afraid, Edith. I'll faint on your hands at the servants' dinner-time the very first opportunity, and then, what with Shoto playing with the fire and the baby crying, you'll begin to wish for a strong-minded woman, equal to any emergency." "And you'll not grow too good to joke and be merry?" "Not I. I shall be merrier than I have ever been, now I have got my own way." "And you'll not go a figure, but let me buy your dresses for you?"
"Indeed, I mean to buy them for myself. You shall come with me if you like, but no one can please me but myself."
"Oh, I was afraid you'd dress in brown and dust color, not to show the dirt you'll pick up in all those places. I'm glad you're going to keep one or two vanities, just by way of specimens of the old Adam."
"I'm going to be just the same, Edith, if you and my aunt could but fancy so, only, as I have neither husband nor child to give me natural duties, I must make myself some, in addition to ordering my gowns." In the family conclave, which was made up of Edith, her mother, and her husband, it was decided that perhaps all these plans of hers would only secure her the more for Henry Lennox. They kept her out of the way of other friends who might have eligible sons or brothers, and it was also agreed that she never seemed to take much pleasure in the society of anyone but Henry, out of their own family. The other admirers, attracted by her appearance or the reputation of her fortune, were swept away by her unconscious smiling disdain into the paths frequented by other beauties less fastidious, or other heiresses with a larger amount of gold. Henry and she grew slowly into closer intimacy, but neither he nor she were people to brook the slightest notice of their proceedings.
Okay, so everything changed, right? I mean, everything has changed now. Margaret is an heiress. I mean, that's a lot of money that she has. And money in property, too, which is very good. She's standing up to Edith. I will buy my own dresses. Thank you very much. Back off, babe. Done. I have had it. I loved that. I thought, oh, wow, this is a new Margaret that we're seeing here. And what brought that about is she has money. She is a woman who can now decide her own fate, and she simply was not that woman before. The importance of this cannot be understated. Now, Mrs. Gaskell, who separated herself from the rest of the literary writing group. There was a group of authors who were very famous in their time during this period. We had Thackeray, we had Dickens, we had Charlotte Bronte. We had, all of these people who were part of a club, for lack of a better way to explain it. They met with each other, they had dinner with each other, they hung out with each other, they all knew each other, and there were some egos going on in there a little bit. But Elizabeth Gaskell set herself apart from the get-go because when she published as Mrs. Gaskell. She was primarily a mother and a wife. She also happened to be a real rockin' writer. But when she promoted herself in public, she promoted herself as a wife. That put her on very separate footing. Even though the longer she went on writing, the more she found that she liked London and that she liked being in the company of other writers, the excitement, the interest and the conversations that they had. And it was a lot of fun. And being at home was being at home. And writing is drudgery. Have I told you that? Writing is drudgery. It is a great life of the mind, but it is toil. And so, of course, she liked going to London, but she also liked going other places. She liked traveling. She liked doing all this stuff, and her husband kind of didn't. And so towards the end of her life, when she had made basically a fortune for herself, when she had made her own money, she did something rather shocking for Mrs. Gaskell to do. She bought a house down by the ocean in the South and didn't tell her husband. Since she knew that he did not particularly like London life, she wanted at least someplace special where they could go, someplace that was light and bright and beautiful and inspiring. And she took her daughters there, and they went and they visited, and they were having a lovely time. And they sat down to tea one day, and she was having a nice time with her daughters, talking about how they were going to surprise their father with all of this, and gasped and dropped dead. And that was it. That was it. I mean, I guess she had a heart attack. The end. And her husband is left looking at the facts on the paper of, here's your wife, the woman who you'd been married to for many, many years and who had all of your children and who promoted herself as Mrs. Gaskell, your name, and here she died in a house that you didn't even know she bought. That might be a little hard to swallow, but it speaks to something that we certainly saw in Jane Eyre, and we're seeing here again in North and South, that for a woman to be her own self, something that clearly Gaskell and Bronte were both interested in, to be their own woman, they had to have money of their own. And that mattered more than anything else. That said, I want to give Elizabeth Gaskell some other props because she does something in these chapters that I think is so incredibly unique. She makes Henry Lennox a real person and not an NGB. I've talked about this before, a nice guy, but he's a nice guy, but he is not an NGB. He is not St. John from Jane Eyre. And to back up my thesis, I would like to cite a passage. There is this moment where they're talking about the conversation at dinner and how Margaret didn't like what Shirley, their friend, this guy Shirley, was having to say. And Lennox is trying to defend it and said, but it's very clever how every word told. Do you remember the happy epithets? These very clever sayings, these very clever things that this friend of his was coming out with. And The whole description of it reminded me of a movie from the 80s called Metropolitan, which you may have never heard of. It was a big deal when it came out and then it kind of disappeared. But it was these rich kids in Manhattan who seemed to get together just to be fabulously rich and fabulously educated with each other and oh so very, very bored. And I couldn't get that image out of my mind as I was reading this. Don't you remember the way he put his phrases together and how brilliant it was? Yes. And you despise them. You would like to add, pray don't scruple, though he's my friend. Don't hold back, Margaret. I can tell what you're thinking. I read you like cheap fiction. And then she says, there, that is the exact tone in you that... And then she stops. And he waits for her to finish, but she doesn't. She just blushes and turns away. But she hears him say quietly, now he's not muttering and he's not whispering. He says it quietly. If my tones or modes of thought are what you dislike, will you do me the justice to tell me so, and so give me the chance of learning to please you? This is not St. John, and this is not Darcy. This isn't even Wentworth. It's not Walter Hartwright. It's not Jonathan Harker. This is a new kind of guy, a new kind of hero. And this guy is one you could live with. He's not perfect. Nobody is. But he wants to learn to do the right thing, not to allow her to run roughshod over him, the way we saw in Wuthering Heights with Catherine and Heathcliff, the way that their passions were so great, and I mean great, like huge and loud and overwhelming, but because he sees her as a real person, and if she would just let him see all of her, they would be able to find the ways that they can fit themselves together and be happy. And that's very, very different. Now, I know you might be sitting there saying, but wait, it's the money that he's all excited about, not Margaret. And yes, he does talk about the money, but there are two things I think about that. Number one, he loved her before, so I'm not counting the money at all. But the second thing was, he talked about her money as an investment in him that he would pay back. And that's a very different way to think about your wife's money in that time, I think, right? It seems to me to be so completely different from how we've seen men think about things like this in previous books. And I'm kind of blown away by Gaskell. Now, I think there is a reason for why she did it this way, but we'll wait until next week to talk about that. On the subject of Margaret, I thought that Gaskell says things in this chapter that are probably no less true for women today, but perhaps things that we just don't talk about much. And I'll read this passage to you. Before they went to Cromer, she had been as docile to her aunt's laws as if she were still the scared little stranger who cried herself to sleep that first night in the Harley Street nursery. But she had learnt, in those solemn hours of thought, that she herself must one day answer for her own life and what she had done with it. And she tried to settle that most difficult problem for women. How much was to be utterly merged in obedience to authority, and how much might be set apart for freedom in working? Mrs. Shaw was as good-tempered as could be, and Edith had inherited this charming domestic quality. Margaret herself had probably the worst temper of the three, for her quick perceptions and over-lively imagination made her hasty, and her early isolation from sympathy had made her proud. But she had an indescribable childlike sweetness of heart which made her manners, even in her rarely willful moods, irresistible of old. And now, chastened even by what the world called her good fortune, she charmed her reluctant aunt into acquiescence with her will. So Margaret gained the acknowledgement of her right to follow her own ideas of duty. That idea that women have a very tricky time figuring out the lines between duty, the things that you have to do if you have children, taking care of the children, being with and taking care of each other, your spouse, working if you work outside the home, working at home if you work inside the home. Finding those boundary lines between what you do for yourself, the life of your mind, and your own work, the work that makes you you. Finding that line for women is tricky. because back then the line was even trickier than it is now. Back then the line was, you are in the home, working in the home, taking care of the children and running the home. If you have a life of the mind, it's probably going to be something that you can cultivate or pursue from within that space, that physical space. Men have had, of late, in our modern world, a similarly difficult time figuring out those lines, the line between your domestic life and your work life. And it especially gets blurry now that our work lives keep encroaching on our domestic lives because of our phones and our computers and things that go ding and tell us that they need our attention, which the Pomodoro technique helps with. So I thought it was very interesting. And in light of the other stuff that I shared about Elizabeth Gaskell, I thought it was perhaps telling that this is something that she included here as she was heading towards the end of the book and probably experiencing something quite like this herself. So we are almost at the end of the book. I so hope you are enjoying it. You can feel, right? You can feel that we are kind of speeding up and heading downhill towards the end, wrapping up all the little loose ends and getting there. We're getting there next week. I didn't want to forget, we got a voicemail forever ago on 9/11, and I didn't see it in my inbox, which has been packed full of stuff. So I found it, and Janine left a very nice voicemail message talking about her experiences on 9/11. If you're a new listener, then you may not know, I was in one of the schools that was evacuated on the morning of 9/11 in 2001, and we evacuated with the kids, and we were all fine. But it was, as you might imagine, quite a thing. And so Janine called in with her story of what happened to her, because it's kind of like, for my parents, it was where they were when Kennedy got shot. For us, it's where we were on 9/11. So here's Janine, and I'll let her play us out. Thanks so much. Have a great week. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Hello, Heather. My name's Janine, and I listen to you from Houston, Texas. Today is September the 11th, and you've told us your story. I really appreciated hearing it. And this year, in honor of the attacks, I wanted to tell you my story. 13 years ago, I was a college student attending Penn State Berks campus in Reading, Pennsylvania, and I was actually skipping my anthropology class to study for a math exam when I heard about the attack. One of my classmates came up and told us that a small plane had flown into the World Trade Tower, and I just thought that was a horrible thing, but I was so worried about my exam I didn't think anything else of it for a while. But my professor was actually pulled out of our exam to discuss closing the campus for the day because we were in between. Like, if you draw a triangle from Shanksville to Washington, D.C. to New York, we were basically in the epicenter of it. So because of the uncertainty of what was happening, they did decide to close the campus. We didn't know that during our exam. So when I get out, there was a crowd of people crowded around the TV in the campus lobby, and I just couldn't stop staring at the TV. And the first thought that went through my head was I had to get to my mother and my sister. My mother worked at the high school where my sister attended, and it was 30 minutes away from my campus. So I just hopped in my car, and I don't think I've ever driven so fast, but I just got to my mom and my sister right about the time the towers fell, and just I couldn't stop crying over the whole thing. It was so scary, and I just wanted to tell you, Heather, how much I appreciate your podcast and how much hope it gives us to hear about all of this literature and all the ways that we can be just kinder and just better to each other. So thank you, Heather. Hope you have a wonderful day.
365. End of North and South. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 365. Please ask. It is a quick episode as far as I am concerned. There's plenty of book for you to listen to, but it's a quick episode for me because I am traveling to Virginia. So when you're listening to this, I will be on the road heading down to Powhatan to go work with the kids. I am so excited. It's so much fun. These kids sent me a video and they are just adorable, wonderful children. I'm very, very happy. So that means I have to hop to it. So the first thing to share with you comes from listener Arlen, who you may recall has a fabulous Scottish accent and has read things for us on the podcast before. He read some Robert Burns, and I read some voices during Dracula too, which was really lovely. But he sent me a link, and he sent it on Sunday, which is kind of interesting, because on Sunday we found out how our neighbor committed suicide. And it was extraordinary in a kind of angry, you're going to have a giant mess to clean up kind of way. And this was shocking. You don't often have this happen. And then Arlen sends me a link to the sermon that his rabbi gave on Yom Kippur, which was Saturday. Well, Friday night is when it started, but Saturday is when sermon. So the theme of the sermon is ask for help. Yes, it's a Yom Kippur sermon, which means, yes, it's aimed at a room full of Jews, but I know plenty of women who are not Jewish who could benefit from reading this. People who have a hard time asking for help when it comes to themselves. Perfectly capable of asking for help for other people, but not so much when it comes to them. Thank you to Deb, who sent me quilting needles and fabric in the mail. Tonight, I tested the quilting needle, and oh my gosh, I was so not mistaken. I really seriously had the wrong needles. What a difference. I don't even have to use a thimble with this one. It just goes right through like butter. Thank you so much, Deb. And on that same quilty note, I have a phone call, voicemail thing from Donna about the thread that I have in my grandmother's case. I think this might be important information to disseminate. So here is Donna.
Hi, Heather. This is Donna, also known as Matka Z on Ravelry. During your podcast this week, you talked about the fact that your grandmother, you have some sewing supplies, including thread that your grandmother gave you, that you inherited from her, and you were talking about using that thread to repair your quilt. I just wanted to let you know that you really want to think about that thread. Old thread does age, and exposure to light and time does weaken it and can actually cause it to rot. Particularly if the thread is on wooden spools, you should not use it. Particularly for something as important as this quilt that you're repairing, you really want to go out and buy some good quality new cotton thread and use that. And if this is older thread, you might want to keep it as a keepsake, but you really shouldn't use it to repair your quilt or really any other kind of sewing.
So I think I'm going to be throwing out a lot of that thread, actually. Lots on wooden spindles. But I'm going to keep the wooden spindles. I'll just not use the thread so much. We have another call from another listener. This is from Laura, and she has something to share with you if you are going to Rhinebeck, which I am not this year, but if you are, have a listen.
Hi, Heather. This is Lisa Barnes calling from LMB Designs. I want to invite your listeners to join me on an exclusive tour of the New York Sheep and Wool Festival in Rhinebeck, New York on Sunday, October 19th. As you may know, this is the premier yarn festival in the Northeast, one that knitters, crocheters, spinners, and fiber enthusiasts flock to. As a knitting designer and teacher, I have the inside scoop on how to navigate the festival and will be leading my students and fellow knitters on this adventure. The tour will include charter bus travel from the New York City, northern New Jersey area, admission into the festival, my insider tips and tricks to help you enjoy the festival without feeling overwhelmed, private informative sessions with vendors and special discount offers just for us, festival activities including sheep herding demonstrations, the fleece to shawl competition, nose-to-nose greetings with alpaca, and wine tasting of local wineries. And throughout the day, you will receive personalized knitting help and fiber advice from me. The cost is $97 with transportation, or you can meet us at the fairgrounds for only $55. If you're interested in joining us, please email me at lisa@lmbdesigns.com no later than this Monday, October 13th. Don't miss out on this exclusive tour of Rhinebeck Festival on October 19th. I hope you can join us.
So yes, I wish I were going to Rhinebeck. It sounds great, though. It sounds like a really great deal. And especially like the wine tasting part of it. I think that would be marvelous. So I hope some of you can go. It would be lovely. Make sure she knows that you are CraftLit people when you meet up, so she knows. You will hear a reference to people making a bad end in America. This is not what it sounds like. This is actually a speculative investment loan-making thing that happened. In 1840, there was a problem. I think there were 9 states that were defaulting on loans that had been floated to them by banks in London. It was embarrassing. It was also a problem because it means if you were a manufacturer and you were having any kind of commerce with the United States at that time, you were going to be up a deep yogurt creek without a paddle. That's the reference. And the beginning of the first chapter, the beginning of chapter 50 that we listened to, is a kind of a third-person, broad summation of a place and a time. It's really lovely writing too, but that's where that particular piece of information is going to kick in. You will also hear 2 references that I think are just really cool. And especially if you are listening to Sherlock Holmes over on the premium audio feed, one of these is going to make you smile. The first is the phrase cash nexus. Now, some people have said that that came from Karl Marx. It didn't. It came from, and this is what the Sherlock people are going to smile at, Thomas Carlyle. Carlyle's quote is eventually in the future, we will arrive at a place when cash payment has become the sole nexus of man to man, meaning we won't have any other kind of commerce. We won't have sitting down at a table and having coffee with each other commerce. We won't have face-to-face commerce. We won't have these moments of exchange unless they have to do with money. And so that was a Carlyle prediction, and that's the phrase cash nexus. And the other really cool one, I love this one. You're going to hear this phrase, but it might be the point Archimedes sought from which to move the earth. I'm going to say it again, but better. It might be the point Archimedes sought from which to move the earth. Now, this is referring to something that Archimedes, evidently back in ancient Greece, one of the things he thought about when he was thinking was, wow, wouldn't it be interesting if we could find some place outside of the earth, outside of our little blue marble in space, and if you could go there and you could stand there, I bet you could actually move the earth. He was thinking about leverage. And, if you have a pry bar big enough, you could just stick it under the earth and have the thing roll away. Well, what this came to mean in conversation was something that's possible in theory, but impossible in reality. Like, yeah, wouldn't that be great to go stand somewhere and move the earth with a rod? Way to go. Not going to happen, but really cool idea. Oh my gosh, I feel like every conversation I have with my 14-year-old is like that. In theory, that's a great idea, but really? No, not so much. And those really are the only things that I need to give you a heads up on, because again, once you get towards the end of the book, everything goes as it goes, really. So here we go, listening to chapters 50, 51, and 52 of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell.
Chapter 50. Changes at Milton. Here we go up, 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 and here we go down, down, downy. Nursery Song. Meanwhile, at Milton, the chimneys smoked, the ceaseless roar and mighty beat and dizzying whirl of machinery struggled and strove perpetually. Senseless and purposeless were wood and iron and steam in their endless labors, but the persistence of their monotonous work was rivaled in tireless endurance by the strong crowds who, with sense and with purpose, were busy and restless in seeking after what? In the streets there were few loiterers, none walking for mere pleasure. Every man's face was set in lines of eagerness or anxiety. News was sought for with fierce avidity, and men jostled each other aside in the mart and in the exchange, as they did in life, in the deep selfishness of competition. There was gloom over the town. Few came to buy, and those who did were looked at suspiciously by the sellers, for credit was insecure, and the most stable might have their fortunes affected by the sweep in the great neighboring port among the shipping houses. Hitherto there had been no failures in Milton, but from the immense speculations that had come to light in making a bad end in America, and yet nearer home, it was known that some Milton houses of business must suffer so severely that every day men's faces asked, if their tongues did not, "What news? Who is gone? How will it affect me?" And if 2 or 3 spoke together, they dwelt rather on the names of those who were safe than dared to hint at those likely, in their opinion, to go. For idle breath may, at such times, cause the downfall of some who might otherwise weather the storm, and one going down drags many after. "Thornton is safe," say they. "His business is large, extending every year, but such a head as he has, and so prudent with all his daring." Then one man draws another aside and walks a little apart, and, with head inclined into his neighbor's ear, he says, "Thornton's business is large, but he has spent his profits in extending it. He has no capital laid by. His machinery is new within these 2 years, and has cost him, we won't say what, a word to the wise." But that Mr. Harrison was a croaker, a man who had succeeded to his father's trade-made fortune, which he had feared to lose by altering his mode of business to any having a larger scope. Yet he grudged every penny made by others more daring and far-sighted. But the truth was, Mr. Thornton was hard-pressed. He felt it acutely in his vulnerable point, his pride in the commercial character which he had established for himself. Architect of his own fortunes, he attributed this to no special merit or qualities of his own, but to the power which he believed that commerce gave to every brave, honest, and persevering man to raise himself to a level from which he might see and read the great game of worldly success, and honestly, by such far-sightedness, command more power and influence than in any other mode of life. Far away, in the East and in the West, where his person would never be known, his name was to be regarded, and his wishes to be fulfilled, and his word pass like gold. That was the idea of merchant life with which Mr. Thornton had started. "Her merchants be like princes," said his mother, reading the text aloud as if it were a trumpet call to invite her boy to the struggle. He was but like many others, men, women, and children, alive to distant and dead to near things. He sought to possess the influence of a name in foreign countries and faraway seas, to become the head of a firm that should be known for generations, and it had taken him long silent years to come even to a glimmering of what he might be now, today, here in his own town, his own factory, among his own people. He and they had led parallel lives, very close but never touching, till the accident, or so it seemed, of his acquaintance with Higgins. Once brought face to face, man to man, with an individual of the masses around him, and, take notice, out of the character of master and workman in the first instance, they had each begun to recognize that we have all of us one human heart. It was the fine point of the wedge, and until now, when the apprehension of losing his connection with 2 or 3 of the workmen whom he had so lately begun to know as men, of having a plan or two which were experiments lying very close to his heart, roughly nipped off without trial, gave a new poignancy to the subtle fear that came over him from time to time. Until now, he had never recognized how much and how deep was the interest he had grown of late to feel in his position as manufacturer, simply because it led him into such close contact and gave him the opportunity of so much power among a race of people strange, shrewd, ignorant, but above all, full of character and strong human feeling. He reviewed his position as a Milton manufacturer. The strike a year and a half ago, or more, for it was now untimely wintry weather in a late spring. That strike, when he was young, and he now was old, had prevented his completing some of the large orders he had then on hand. He had locked up a good deal of his capital in new and expensive machinery, and he had also bought cotton largely for the fulfillment of these orders taken under contract. That he had not been able to complete them was owing in some degree to the utter want of skill on the part of the Irish hands whom he had imported. Much of their work was damaged and unfit to be sent forth by a house which prided itself on turning out nothing but first-rate articles. For many months the embarrassment caused by the strike had been an obstacle in Mr. Thornton's way, and often, when his eye fell on Higgins, he could have spoken angrily to him without any present cause, just from feeling how serious was the injury that had arisen from this affair in which he was implicated. But when he became conscious of this sudden, quick resentment, he resolved to curb it. It would not satisfy him to avoid Higgins. He must convince himself that he was master over his own anger by being particularly careful to allow Higgins access to him whenever the strict rules of business or Mr. Thornton's leisure permitted. And by, he lost all sense of resentment in wonder how it was, or could be, that two men like himself and Higgins, living by the same trade, working in their different ways at the same object, could look upon each other's position and duties in so strangely different a way. And thence arose that intercourse, which, though it might not have the effect of preventing all future clash of opinion and action, when the occasion arose, would, at any rate, enable both master and man to look upon each other with far more charity and sympathy, and bear with each other more patiently and kindly. Besides this improvement of feeling, both Mr. Thornton and his workmen found out their ignorance as to positive matters of fact, known heretofore to one side, but not to the other. But now had come one of those periods of bad trade when the market falling brought down the value of all large stocks. Mr. Thornton's fell to nearly half. No orders were coming in, so he lost the interest of the capital he had locked up in machinery. Indeed, it was difficult to get payment for the orders completed, yet there was the constant drain of expenses for working the business. Then the bills became due for the cotton he had purchased, and money being scarce, he could only borrow at exorbitant interest, and yet he could not realize any of his property. But he did not despair. He exerted himself day and night to foresee and to provide for all emergencies. He was as calm and gentle to the women in his home as ever. To the workmen in his mill he spoke not many words, but they knew him by this time, and many a curt, decided answer was received by them rather with sympathy for the care they saw pressing upon him than with the suppressed antagonism which had formerly been smouldering and ready for hard words and hard judgments on all occasions. "The master's a deal to potter him," said Higgins one day, as he heard Mr. Thornton's short, sharp inquiry why such a command had not been obeyed, and caught the sound of the suppressed sigh which he heaved in going past the room where some of the men were working. Higgins and another man stopped over hours that night, unknown to anyone, to get the neglected piece of work done, and Mr. Thornton never knew but that the overlooker, to whom he had given the command in the first instance, had done it himself. I reckon I know who'd have been sorry for to see our master sitting so like a piece of grey calico. The old parson would have fretted his woman's heart out if he'd seen the woeful looks I've seen on our master's face, thought Higgins one day as he was approaching Mr. Thornton in Marlborough Street. "Master," said he, stopping his employer in his quick, resolved walk, and causing that gentleman to look up with a sudden annoyed start, as if his thoughts had been far away.
"Have ye heard aught of Miss Margaret lately?"
"Miss who?" replied Mr. Thornton.
"Miss Margaret. Miss Hale, the old parson's daughter. You know who I mean well enough if you'll only think a bit."
There was nothing disrespectful in the tone in which this was said. "Oh, yes." And suddenly the wintry, frost-bound look of care had left Mr. Thornton's face, as if some soft summer gale had blown all anxiety away from his mind, and though his mouth was as much compressed as before, his eyes smiled out benignly on his questioner.
"She's my landlord now, you know, Higgins. I hear of her through her agent here every now and then. She's well and among friends. Thank you, Higgins."
That thank you that lingered after the other words, and yet came with so much warmth of feeling, let in a new light to the acute Higgins. It might be but a will-o'-the-wisp, but he thought he would follow it and ascertain whither it would lead him.
"And she's not getting married, master?"
"Not yet." The face was cloudy once more.
"There is some talk of it, as I understand, with a connection of the family." "Then she'll not be coming for Milton again, I reckon."
"No."
"Stop a minute, master."
Then, going up confidentially close, he said,
"Is the young gentleman cleared?"
He enforced the depth of his intelligence by a wink of the eye, which only made things more mysterious to Mr. Thornton.
"The young gentleman, I mean. Master Frederick, they called him. Her brother as was over here, you know."
"Over here?"
"Aye, to be sure, at the missus' death. You need not be afeard of my telling, for Mary and me, we knowed it all along, only we held our peace, for we got it through Mary working in the house."
"And he was over? It was her brother?"
"Sure enough, and I reckon you knowed it, or I'd never a let on. You knowed she had a brother?"
"Yes, I know all about him, and he was over at Mrs. Hale's death."
"Nay, I'm not going for to tell more. I may be getting them into mischief already, for they kept it very close. I nobbut wanted to know if they'd getten him cleared."
"Not that I know of. I know nothing. I only hear of Miss Hale now as my landlord through her lawyer." He broke off from Higgins to follow the business on which he had been bent when the latter first accosted him, leaving Higgins baffled in his endeavour. "It was her brother," said Mr. Thornton to himself. "I am glad. I may never see her again, but it is a comfort, a relief, to know that much. I knew she could not be unmaidenly, and yet I yearned for conviction. Now I am glad." It was a little golden thread running through the dark web of his present fortunes, which were growing ever gloomier and more gloomy. His agent had largely trusted a house in the American trade, which went down, along with several others, just at this time, like a pack of cards, the fall of one compelling other failures. What were Mr. Thornton's engagements? Could he stand? Night after night he took books and papers into his own private room and sat up there long after the family were gone to bed. He thought that no one knew of this occupation of the hours he should have spent in sleep. One morning, when daylight was stealing in through the crevices of his shutters, and he had never been in bed, and, in hopeless indifference of mind, was thinking that he could do without the hour or two of rest, which was all that he should be able to take before the stir of daily labour began again, the door of his room opened, and his mother stood there, dressed as she had been the day before. She had never laid herself down to slumber any more than he. Their eyes met. Their faces were cold and rigid and wan from long watching.
"Mother, why are you not in bed?"
"Son John," said she, "do you think I can sleep with an easy mind while you keep awake full of care? You have not told me what your trouble is, but sore trouble you have had these many days past."
"Trade is bad."
"And you dread?"
"I dread nothing.
replied he, drawing up his head and holding it erect. I know now that no man will suffer by me. That was my anxiety. But how do you stand? Shall you? Will it be a failure? Her steady voice trembling in an unwonted manner. Not a failure. I must give up business, but I pay all men. I might redeem myself. I am sorely tempted. How? Oh, John, keep up your name. Try all risks for that. How redeem it? By speculation offered to me full of risk, but if successful, placing me high above watermark, so that no one need ever know the strait I am in. Still, if it fails. And if it fails, said she, advancing and laying her hand on his arm, her eyes full of eager light. She held her breath to hear the end of his speech. Honest men are ruined by a rogue, said he gloomily. As I stand now, my creditors, money is safe, every farthing of it, but I don't know where to find my own. It may be all gone, and I penniless at this moment. Therefore, it is my creditors' money that I should risk. But if it succeeded, they need never know. Is it so desperate a speculation? I'm sure it is not, or you would never have thought of it. If it succeeded, I should be a rich man, and my peace of conscience would be gone. Why, you would have injured no one? No, but I should have run the risk of ruining many for my own paltry aggrandisement. Mother, I have decided. You won't much grieve over our leaving this house, shall you, dear mother? No, but to have you other than what you are will break my heart. What can you do? Be always the same John Thornton in whatever circumstances, endeavouring to do right and making great blunders, and then trying to be brave and setting to afresh. But it is hard, mother. I have so worked and planned. I have discovered new powers in my situation too late, and now all is over. I am too old to begin again with the same heart. It is hard, mother. He turned away from her and covered his face with his hands. I can't think, said she with gloomy defiance in her tone, how it comes about. Here is my boy, good son, just man, tender heart, and he fails in all he sets his mind upon. He finds a woman to love, and she cares no more for his affection than if he had been any common man. He labours, and his labour comes to naught. Other people prosper and grow rich, and hold their paltry names high and dry above shame. Shame never touched me, said he in a low tone, but she went on. I sometimes have wondered where justice was gone to. And now I don't believe there is such a thing in the world, now you are come to this. You, my own John Thornton, though you and I may be beggars together, my own dear son. She fell upon his neck and kissed him through her tears. Mother, said he, holding her gently in his arms, who has sent me my lot in life, both of good and of evil? She shook her head. She would have nothing to do with religion just then. Mother, he went on, seeing that she would not speak, I too have been rebellious, but I am striving to be so no longer. Help me as you helped me when I was a child. Then you said many good words when my father died, and we were sometimes sorely short of comfort, which we shall never be now. You said brave, noble, trustful words then, mother, which I have never forgotten, though they may have lain dormant. Speak to me again in the old way, mother. Do not let us have to think that the world has too much hardened our hearts. If you would say the old good words, it would make me feel something of the pious simplicity of my childhood. I say them to myself, but they would come differently from you, remembering all the cares and trials you have had to bear. I have had many, said she, sobbing, but none so sore as this, to see you cast down from your rightful place. I could say it for myself, John, but not for you. God has seemed to be very hard on you, very." She shook with the sobs that come so convulsively when an old person weeps. The silence around her struck her at last, and she quieted herself to listen. No sound. She looked. Her son sat by the table, his arms thrown half across it, his head bent face downwards. "Oh, John," she said, and she lifted his face up. Such a strange, pallid look of gloom was on it that for a moment it struck her that this look was the forerunner of death. But as the rigidity melted out of the countenance and the natural colour returned, and she saw that he was himself once again, all worldly mortification sank to nothing before the consciousness of the great blessing that he himself, by his simple existence, was to her. She thanked God for this, and this alone, with a fervour that swept away all rebellious feelings from her mind. He did not speak readily, but he went and opened the shutters and let the ruddy light of dawn flood the room. But the wind was in the east. The weather was piercing cold, as it had been for weeks. There would be no demand for light summer goods this year. That hope for the revival of trade must utterly be given up. It was a great comfort to have had this conversation with his mother, and to feel sure that, however they might henceforward keep silence on all these anxieties, they yet understood each other's feelings, and were, if not in harmony, at least not in discord with each other in their way of viewing them. Fanny's husband was vexed at Thornton's refusal to take any share in the speculation which he had offered to him, and withdrew from any possibility of being supposed able to assist him with the ready money which indeed the speculator needed for his own venture. There was nothing for it at last but that which Mr. Thornton had dreaded for many weeks. He had to give up the business in which he had been so long engaged with so much honour and success, and look out for a subordinate situation. Marlborough Mills and the adjacent dwelling were held under a long lease. They must, if possible, be relet. There was an immediate choice of situations offered to Mr. Thornton. Mr. Hamper would have been only too glad to have secured him as a steady and experienced partner for his son, whom he was setting up with a large capital in a neighbouring town. But the young man was half-educated as regarded information, and wholly uneducated as regarded any other responsibility than that of getting money, and brutalized both as to his pleasures and his pains. Mr. Thornton declined having any share in a partnership which would frustrate what few plans he had that survived the wreck of his fortunes. He would sooner consent to be only a manager where he could have a certain degree of power beyond the mere money-getting part than have to fall in with the tyrannical humours of a moneyed partner with whom he felt sure that he should quarrel in a few months. So he waited and stood on one side with profound humility as the news swept through the exchange of the enormous fortune which his brother-in-law had made by his daring speculation. It was a 9 days' wonder. Success brought with it its worldly consequence of extreme admiration. No one was considered so wise and far-seeing as Mr. Watson. Chapter 51. Meeting Again. Bear up, brave heart. We will be calm and strong. Sure we can master eyes or cheek or tongue, nor let the smallest telltale sign appear. She ever was, and is, and will be dear. Rhyming play. It was a hot summer's evening. Edith came into Margaret's bedroom, the first time in her habit, the second ready-dressed for dinner. No one was there at first. The next time Edith found Dixon laying out Margaret's dress on the bed, but no Margaret. Edith remained to fidget about.
"Oh, Dixon, not those horrid blue flowers to that dead gold-coloured gown. What taste! Wait a minute, and I will bring you some pomegranate blossoms." It's not a dead gold colour, Mum. It's straw colour, and blue always goes with straw colour.
But Edith had brought the brilliant scarlet flowers before Dixon had got half through her remonstrance.
"Where is Miss Hale?"
asked Edith as soon as she had tried the effect of the garniture.
"I can't think," she went on pettishly, "how my aunt allowed her to get into such rambling habits in Milton. I'm sure I'm always expecting to hear of her having met with something horrible among all those wretched places she pokes herself into. I should never dare to go down some of those streets without a servant. They're not fit for ladies."
Dixon was still huffed about her despised taste, so she replied rather shortly,
"It's no wonder to my mind when I hear ladies talk such a deal about being ladies, and when they're such fearful, delicate, dainty ladies, too. I say it's no wonder to me that there are no longer any saints on earth." "Oh, Margaret, here you are. I have been so wanting you. But how your cheeks are flushed with the heat, poor child. But only think what that tiresome Henry has done. Really, he exceeds brother-in-law's limits. Just when my party was made up so beautifully, fitted in so precisely for Mr. Colthurst, there Henry has to come, with an apology, it is true, and making use of your name for an excuse, and asked me if he may bring that Mr. Thornton of Milton, your tenant, you know, who is in London about some law business. It will spoil my number quite. I don't mind dinner. I don't want any," said Margaret in a low voice. "Dixon can get me a cup of tea here, and I will be in the drawing-room by the time you come up. I shall really be glad to lie down." "No, no, that will never do. You do look wretchedly white, to be sure, but that is just the heat, and we can't do without you possibly. Those flowers a little lower, Dixon. They look glorious flames, Margaret, in your black hair. You know, we planned you to talk about Milton to Mr. Colthurst. Oh, to be sure, and this man comes from Milton. I believe it will be capital after all. Mr. Colthurst can pump him well on all the subjects in which he is interested, and it will be great fun to trace out your experiences and this Mr. Thornton's wisdom in Mr. Colthurst's next speech in the House. Really, I think it is a happy hit of Henry's. I asked him if he was a man one would be ashamed of, and he replied, 'Not if you've any sense in you, my little sister.' So I suppose he is able to sound his H's, which is not a common Darkshire accomplishment, eh, Margaret?" "Mr. Lennox did not say why Mr. Thornton was come up to town? Was it law business connected with the property?" asked Margaret in a constrained voice. "Oh, he's failed or something of the kind. That Henry told you of the day you had such a headache. What was it? There, that's capital, Dixon. Miss Hale does us credit, does she not? I wish I was as tall as a queen and as brown as a gypsy, Margaret." "But about Mr. Thornton?" "Oh, I really have such a terrible head for law business. Henry will like nothing better than to tell you all about it. I know the impression he made upon me was that Mr. Thornton is very badly off, and a very respectable man, and that I am to be very civil to him. And as I did not know how, I came to you to ask you to help me. And now come down with me and rest on the sofa for a quarter of an hour." The privileged brother-in-law came early, and Margaret, reddening as she spoke, began to ask him the questions she wanted to hear answered about Mr. Thornton.
"He came up about this subletting the property, Marlborough Mills, and the house and the premises adjoining, I mean. He is unable to keep it on, and there are deeds and leases to be looked over and agreements to be drawn up. I hope Edith will receive him properly, but she was rather put out, as I could see, by the liberty I had taken in begging for an invitation for him. But I thought you would like to have some attention shown him, and one would be particularly scrupulous in paying every respect to a man who is going down in the world."
He had dropped his voice to speak to Margaret, by whom he was sitting. But as he ended, he sprang up and introduced Mr. Thornton, who had that moment entered, to Edith and Captain Lennox. Margaret looked with an anxious eye at Mr. Thornton while he was thus occupied. It was considerably more than a year since she had seen him, and events had occurred to change him much in that time. His fine figure yet bore him above the common height of men, and gave him a distinguished appearance from the ease of motion which arose out of it, and was natural to him, but his face looked older and careworn. Yet a noble composure sat upon it, which impressed those who had just been hearing of his changed position, with a sense of inherent dignity and manly strength. He was aware, from the first glance he had given round the room, that Margaret was there. He had seen her intent look of occupation as she listened to Mr. Henry Lennox, and he came up to her with the perfectly regulated manner of an old friend. With his first calm words, a vivid colour flashed into her cheeks, which never left them again during the evening. She did not seem to have much to say to him. She disappointed him by the quiet way in which she asked what seemed to him to be the merely necessary questions respecting her old acquaintances in Milton. But others came in, more intimate in the house than he, and he fell into the background, where he and Mr. Lennox talked together from time to time.
"You think Miss Hale looking well," said Mr. Lennox, "don't you? Milton didn't agree with her, I imagine, for when she first came to London I thought I'd never seen anyone so much changed. Tonight she is looking radiant. But she is much stronger. Last autumn she was fatigued with a walk of a couple of miles. On Friday evening we walked up to Hampstead and back. Yet on Saturday she looked as well as she does now."
"We? Who?"
"They two alone."
Mr. Colthurst was a very clever man and a rising member of Parliament. He had a quick eye at discerning character, and was struck by a remark which Mr. Thornton made at dinner-time. He inquired from Edith who that gentleman was, and rather to her surprise, she found, from the tone of his "indeed," that Mr. Thornton of Milton was not such an unknown name to him as she had imagined it would be. Her dinner was going off well. Henry was in good humour, and brought out his dry, caustic wit admirably. Mr. Thornton and Mr. Colthurst found one or two mutual subjects of interest which they could only touch upon then, reserving them for more private after-dinner talk. Margaret looked beautiful in the pomegranate flowers, and if she did lean back in her chair and speak but little, Edith was not annoyed, for the conversation flowed on smoothly without her. Margaret was watching Mr. Thornton's face. He never looked at her, so she might study him unobserved and note the changes which even this short time had wrought in him. Only at some unexpected mot of Mr. Lennox's, his face flashed out into the old look of intense enjoyment. The merry brightness returned to his eyes, the lips just parted to suggest the brilliant smile of former days, and for an instant his glance instinctively sought hers, as if he wanted her sympathy. But when their eyes met, his whole countenance changed. He was grave and anxious once more, and he resolutely avoided even looking near her again during dinner. There were only two ladies besides their own party, and as these were occupied in conversation by her aunt and Edith when they went up into the drawing-room, Margaret languidly employed herself about some work. Presently the gentlemen came up, Mr. Colthurst and Mr. Thornton in close conversation. Mr. Lennox drew near to Margaret and said in a low voice, "I really think Edith owes me thanks for my contribution to her party. You've no idea what an agreeable, sensible fellow this tenant of yours is. He has been the very man to give Colthurst all the facts he wanted coaching in. I can't conceive how he contrived to mismanage his affairs." "With his powers and opportunities, you would have succeeded," said Margaret. He did not quite relish the tone in which she spoke, although the words but expressed a thought which had passed through his own mind. As he was silent, they caught a swell in the sound of conversation going on near the fireplace between Mr. Colthurst and Mr. Thornton.
"I assure you, I heard it spoken of with great interest, curiosity as to its result, perhaps I should rather say. I heard your name frequently mentioned during my short stay in the neighbourhood."
Then they lost some words, and when next they could hear Mr. Thornton was speaking. "I have no elements for popularity. If they spoke of me in that way, they were mistaken. I fall slowly into new projects, and I find it difficult to let myself be known, even by those whom I desire to know, and with whom I would fain have no reserve. Yet, even with all these drawbacks, I felt that I was on the right path, and that, starting from a kind of friendship with one, I was becoming acquainted with many. The advantages were mutual. We were both unconsciously and consciously teaching each other." "You say were. I trust you are intending to pursue the same course?" "I must stop Colthurst," said Henry Lennox hastily. And by an abrupt yet apropos question, he turned the current of the conversation so as not to give Mr. Thornton the mortification of acknowledging his want of success and consequent change of position. But as soon as the newly started subject had come to a close, Mr. Thornton resumed the conversation just where it had been interrupted, and gave Mr. Colthurst the reply to his inquiry. "I have been unsuccessful in business, and have had to give up my position as master. I am on the lookout for a situation in Milton where I may meet with employment under someone who will be willing to let me go along my own way in such matters as these. I can depend upon myself for having no go-ahead theories that I would rashly bring into practice. My only wish is to have the opportunity of cultivating some intercourse with the hands beyond the mere cash nexus. But it might be the point Archimedes sought from which to move the earth, to judge from the importance attached to it by some of our manufacturers, who shake their heads and look grave as soon as I name the 1 or 2 experiments that I should like to try." "You call them experiments, I notice," said Mr. Colthurst, with a delicate increase of respect in his manner. "Because I believe them to be such. I am not sure of the consequences that may result from them, but I am sure they ought to be tried. I have arrived at the conviction that no mere institutions, however wise and however much thought may have been required to organize and arrange them, can attach class to class as they should be attached, unless the work and art of such institutions bring the individuals of the different classes into actual personal contact. Such intercourse is at the very breath of life. A working man can hardly be made to feel and know how much his employer may have laboured in his study at plans for the benefit of his work-people. A complete plan emerges like a piece of machinery, apparently fitted for every emergency. But the hands accept it as they do machinery, without understanding the intense mental labour and forethought required to bring it to such perfection. But I would take an idea, the working out of which would necessitate personal intercourse. It might not go well at first, but at every hitch interest would be felt by an increasing number of men, and at last its success in working come to be desired by all, as all had borne a part in the formation of the plan, and even then I am sure that it would lose its vitality, cease to be living as soon as it was no longer carried on by that sort of common interest which invariably makes people find means and ways of seeing each other, and becoming acquainted with each other's characters and persons, and even tricks of temper and modes of speech. We should understand each other better, and I'll venture to say we should like each other more." "And you think they may prevent the recurrence of strikes?" "Not at all. My utmost expectation only goes so far as this, that they may render strikes not the bitter, venomous sources of hatred they have hitherto been. A more hopeful man might imagine that a closer and more genial intercourse between classes might do away with strikes. But I am not a hopeful man." Suddenly, as if a new idea had struck him, he crossed over to where Margaret was sitting, and began without preface, as if he knew she had been listening to all that had passed. "Miss Hale, I had a round robin from some of my men, I suspect in Higgins' handwriting, stating their wish to work for me if ever I was in a position to employ men again on my own behalf. That was good, wasn't it?" Yes, just right. I am glad of it, said Margaret, looking up straight into his face with her speaking eyes, and then dropping them under his eloquent glance. He gazed back at her for a minute, as if he did not know exactly what he was about, then sighed and said, I knew you would like it. He turned away and never spoke to her again until he bid her a formal good night. As Mr. Lennox took his departure, Margaret said with a blush that she could not repress, and with some hesitation, Can I speak to you tomorrow? I want your help about something. Certainly. I will come at whatever time you name. You cannot give me a greater pleasure than by making me of any use. At 11? Very well. His eye brightened with exultation. How she was learning to depend upon him. It seemed as if any day now might give him the certainty, without having which he had determined never to offer to her again. Chapter 52. Pack clouds away. For joy or grief, for hope or fear, for all hereafter as for here, in peace or strife, in storm or shine. Anonymous. Edith went about on tiptoe and checked Sholto in all loud speaking that next morning, as if any sudden noise would interrupt the conference that was taking place in the drawing-room. 2 o'clock came, and they still sat there with closed doors. Then there was a man's footstep running downstairs, and Edith peeped out of the drawing-room. "Well, Henry?" said she with a look of interrogation. "Well," said he rather shortly. "Come in to lunch?" "No, thank you, I can't. I've lost too much time here already." "Then it's not all settled," said Edith despondingly. "No, not at all. It never will be settled if the it is what I conjecture you mean. That will never be, Edith, so give up thinking about it." "But it would be so nice for us all," pleaded Edith. "I should always feel comfortable about the children if I had Margaret settled down near me. As it is, I'm always afraid of her going off to Cadiz." "I will try, when I marry, to look out for a young lady who has a knowledge of the management of children. That is all I can do. Miss Hale would not have me, and I shall not ask her." "Then what have you been talking about?" "1,000 things you would not understand. Investments and leases and value of land." "Oh, go away if that's all. You and she will be unbearably stupid if you've been talking all this time about such weary things." "Very well. I'm coming again tomorrow and bringing Mr. Thornton with me to have some more talk with Miss Hale." "Mr. Thornton? What has he to do with it?" "He is Miss Hale's tenant," said Mr. Lennox, turning away, "and he wishes to give up his lease." "Oh, very well. I can't understand details, so don't give them me." "The only detail I want you to understand is to let us have the back drawing-room undisturbed, as it was today. In general, the children and servants are so in and out that I can never get any business satisfactorily explained, and the arrangements we have to make tomorrow are of importance." No one ever knew why Mr. Lennox did not keep to his appointment on the following day. Mr. Thornton came true to his time, and, after keeping him waiting for nearly an hour, Margaret came in looking very white and anxious. She began hurriedly. "I am so sorry Mr. Lennox is not here. He could have done it so much better than I can. He is my adviser in this." "I'm sorry that I came, if it troubles you. Shall I go to Mr. Lennox's chambers and try to find him?" "No, thank you. I wanted to tell you how grieved I was to find that I am to lose you as a tenant, but Mr. Lennox says things are sure to brighten." "Mr. Lennox knows little about it," said Mr. Thornton quietly.
Happy and fortunate in all a man cares for, he does not understand what it is to find oneself no longer young, yet thrown back to the starting point which requires the hopeful energy of youth. To feel one half a life gone, and nothing done, nothing remaining of wasted opportunity, but the bitter recollection that it has been. Miss Ale, I would rather not hear Mr. Lennox's opinion of my affairs. Those who are happy and successful themselves are too apt to make light of the misfortunes of others.
You are unjust, said Margaret gently. Mr. Lennox has only spoken of the great probability which he believes there to be of your more than redeeming what you have lost. Don't speak till I have ended. Pray don't.
And collecting herself once more, she went on rapidly turning over some law papers and statements of accounts in a trembling, hurried manner.
Oh, here it is. And he drew me out a proposal. I wish he was here to explain it, showing that if you would take some money of mine, £18,057, lying just at this moment unused in the bank, and bringing me in only 2.5%, you could pay me much better interest, and might go on working Marlborough Mills.
Her voice had cleared itself and become more steady. Mr. Thornton did not speak, and she went on looking for some paper on which were written down the proposals for security, for she was most anxious to have it all looked upon in the light of a mere business arrangement in which the principal advantage would be on her side. While she sought for this paper, her very heart-pulse was arrested by the tone in which Mr. Thornton spoke. His voice was hoarse and trembling with tender passion as he said, "Margaret." For an instant she looked up, and then sought to veil her luminous eyes by dropping her forehead on her hands. Again, stepping nearer, he besought her with another tremulous, eager call upon her name. "Margaret." Still lower went the head, more closely hidden was the face, almost resting on the table before her. He came close to her. He knelt by her side to bring his face to a level with her ear, and panted out the words, "Take care. If you do not speak, I shall claim you as my own in some strange, presumptuous way. Send me away at once if I must go, Margaret." At that third call she turned her face, still covered with her small white hands, towards him, and laid it on his shoulder, hiding it even there, and it was too delicious to feel her soft cheek against his for him to wish to see either deep blushes or loving eyes. He clasped her close, but they both kept silence. At length she murmured in a broken voice, "Oh, Mr. Thornton, I am not good enough." "Not good enough. Don't mock my own deep feeling of unworthiness." After a minute or two, he gently disengaged her hands from her face and laid her arms as they had once before been placed to protect him from the rioters. "Do you remember, love," he murmured, "and how I requited you with my insolence the next day?" "I remember how wrongly I spoke to you, that is all." "Look here, lift up your head. I have something to show you." She slowly faced him, glowing with beautiful shame. "Do you know these roses?" he said, drawing out his pocketbook, in which were treasured up some dead flowers.
"No," she replied with innocent curiosity. "Did I give them to you?"
"No, Vanity, you did not. You may have worn sister roses, very probably." She looked at them, wondering for a minute. Then she smiled a little as she said,
"They are from Helston, are they not? I know the deep indentations round the leaves. Oh, have you been there? When were you there?"
"I wanted to see the place where Margaret grew to what she is, even at the worst time of all, when I had no hope of ever calling her mine." I went there on my return from Havre.
You must give them to me,
she said, trying to take them out of his hand with gentle violence.
Very well, only you must pay me for them.
How shall I ever tell Aunt Shaw? She whispered, after some time of delicious silence.
Let me speak to her.
Oh, no, I owe to her. But what will she say?
I can guess. Her first exclamation will be, "That man?"
Hush, said Margaret, or I shall try and show you your mother's indignant tones, as she says, "That woman?"
I know, right? That's it. That's all you get. Enjoy it while you can, because it goes by really fast. It is quite literally the last page of the book where Margaret puts her head on Thornton's shoulder. But I love their little statements to each other. That man, that woman, boom, done, curtain, the end, and scene. It's just, I've never read a book from this period that had the cojones to actually pull something like this off. We're supposedly reading a romance, and there has been zero gooiness, which may be why I like the book so much, because it's not that kind of romance. It's the romance of watching Margaret figure out who she is and growing up and learning all this legal stuff from Henry Lennox. And okay, I feel real bad about Henry, right? Because he had to sit there and help her with all this legal stuff, knowing that she was in love with Thornton. Because he's not stupid or mean or a horrible person. And if she had wound up with him, they probably would have done just fine. I did have a couple of issues with Thornton in this section. First, when he finds out that it was Frederick, he's just relieved. And it's interesting because he does criticize himself by saying, I knew she couldn't have done that. And still I needed confirmation. And that's just kind of blah. But he's saying that about himself. And I thought he was marvelous in the scene at the dinner party when he goes back and owns up to the fact that, no, I'm actually looking for a position because things didn't work out. And of course, he doesn't tell anyone else that things didn't work out because he wouldn't invest in this crazy radical scheme that could have lost everything and made it impossible for him to pay his workers. Instead, he just lets it be. It didn't work. I failed. Boom. And Margaret finding a way to not insult him and loan him the money, but in a way that would actually make her more money in the long term. So he couldn't say no because there's no way it could be seen as taking advantage of her, and he'd get to keep Marlborough Mill. And presumably, it was her insisting, no, it has to be a good deal for me, but it also has to be a good deal for him and keep the mill open. I can do better, but he still has to get that. And you can imagine Henry Lennox just going, oh, there is no way to do this. This is insane. Why are we doing it this way? And then the end, that marvelous end, where he puts her arms around his shoulders the way they were that day when she got hit in the head with a rock. That romantic moment when she got clocked with a rock. And then Gaskell does something great. When Margaret tries to take the Helston roses out of Thornton's hand, she says, you must give them to me. And he says, very well, only you must pay me for them. The next line is, how shall I ever tell Aunt Shaw? She whispered after some time of delicious silence. I think we know what they were doing. Mm-hmm. You did kissy hug, yay. And boy, don't they deserve it? After all the work that had to go into getting these two young lovers into this place, it's just mind-boggling and wonderful. So we're going to have a North and South chat, an opportunity for you to sit down and talk with me and other listeners. And if you have a webcam, see and be seen. If you don't have a webcam, it doesn't matter. You can show up. If you have a microphone, whether it's one that's on your computer or one that is something you can carry around with you, you can also talk and have a conversation with all of us. So, fun. That will happen at noon Eastern on Saturday, October 18th. That link is in the show notes, and I will be sending out our little CraftLit email newsletter. If you've signed up for that, it will have the link in it as well. I just discovered a voicemail from a listener that I had missed. This one's kind of important in a quilting kind of way.
Hi, Heather. This is Lori May calling. Lori 1176 on Ravelry and longtime listener and big fan of CraftLit. I'm calling on a beautiful, warm fall day along the San Francisco Bay. I first wanted to comment on your question about needles in episode 363. I'm not a big quilter, but I thought about a tip that my grandmother gave me many, many years ago when she taught me how to sew. This may not be a permanent fix or a big fix for lots and lots of stitching, but for a few stitches, use nose grease. This is my grandmother's tip. You actually rub your finger along the side of your nose, and then you use it to lubricate your needle, basically, and it'll just glide through the fabric. It's a great tip. I've used it often in the many, many years that she gave me that. The other thing I wanted to just mention is that I love to both listen to books and read books, and I almost always have at least 2 books going on CraftLit, the subscriber feed and the regular book, as well as hardcover books on my nightstand and books on my Kindle or iBooks. So I have multiple books going and love to read different books depending on the mood I'm in and the place I'm at.
Okay, so I am going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to imagine that if this were an heirloom quality quilt that I was going to hang on acid-free paper behind glass, I would probably not want to use nose grease. But for everything else in my life, it's such a great idea. Handy little tip for everybody. Thank you to Lori. And the audio came in kind of wonky because Lori was taking a walk by the San Francisco Bay. But the last thing she said was that she does have multiple books going all the time, both CraftLit and premium, hardbacks on the nightstand, and Kindle books on the Kindle. And I think we can all identify with that. So, helpful sewing tip. I will now be on hiatus for a few weeks, getting our next book prepared and ready to go. And it's funny, isn't it the same time of year? Isn't this when I started North and South? Was right after Halloween? I honestly cannot remember. But, be that as it may, memory or none, we will begin Herland somewhere around the first or second week of November. I'll send a newsletter out. We'll have some kind of hoo-ha stuff going on, giveaways, whatever kinds of things. And that's what'll happen. I think that's it. Thank you so much for listening. I am so excited. We read all of Elizabeth Gaskell's book, and I feel so, I don't know, don't you feel morally upright and fabulous for having read this book that too few people had read and is lovely. And Margaret is strong, and so is Thornton. All the women in this book, not so much the shrinking violet thing. And that's the end of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I really hope that you've enjoyed this opportunity to get a little deeper into books that people talk about all the time but haven't necessarily read. Now you know what they may not. And while we're never braggarts, boastful, or snarky about other people who haven't been listening to CraftLit, and therefore don't know all of the insider information that you now know, you now can be there to support your friends and help them understand the jokes that you get. And remember, if your life is too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on. Thanks so much for listening. Hope to see you in CraftLitlandia and get a chance to hear from you too. Have a good one. Bye. You can find show notes for this episode and links to other episodes at craftlit.com. CraftLit also appears anywhere you can get a podcast: iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and on, including its own dedicated app. There are lots of ways to support CraftLit, from patreon.com/craftlit to craftlit.com memberships and channel memberships on YouTube. You can find out more details at craftlit.com/premium. And as always, thank you for your support. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.